Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Go to shiftingculturepodcast.com to interact and donate. And don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app to be notified when new episodes come out each Tuesday. Previous guests on the show have included Catalyse, Rich Robinson, and Alan Hirsch. You could go back, listen to those episodes, and more. But today's guests are Simon and Ceri Harris. Alongside nearly 30 years in local church leadership at Burlington Church in Ipswich, England, Ceri and Simon work with Catalyse Change and the 5Q Collective, training and coaching leaders in churches in releasing missional disciples and helping tap into the latent potential that exists in the church through a rediscovery of the gift of APEST. I had a great time having a conversation with a married couple that leads together. Since my wife and I do that as well, it was a great conversation. You are going to enjoy it. There are plenty of gems in this episode. So get out your notebook, take some notes, and here is Simon and Ceri. Yeah, Simon, Ceri, thank you for being on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you today. Have a great conversation.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have both of you here and both of you on. You know, my wife and I actually co-lead our mission agency together, and so we're both executive directors, and so we do a lot of leading together, but we also do a lot of life together, right? Co-parenting, and we do it all. And so, what did that journey for you to be able to start to live together, to work together and lead together? What is that like? How is that journey?
Well, it's a good job we like each other, I guess.
Yeah.
Marry your best friend and work with your best friend is probably a good idea.
That's good. That's good.
Sorry.
No, I think one of the things that's absolutely true. I think at the basis of our relationship is that sense of friendship and that sense of being called to a shared adventure. And that's the exciting sweet spot that together in the adventure of growing together, and that takes effort and challenge and beauty and all of that over the years, doesn't it? But that sense of depth that you get with one another then leads into a life of deeper leadership, deeper influence, and so on. And so we super appreciate that in each other.
And we were childhood sweethearts who kind of met really young and immediately knew that was it for us, and always felt a call to kind of do work together and do things together. And I think what we realized really early on was we always reached the same conclusions. We just got there in different ways. And so actually really early on discovering that the way that we kind of what we both bring to the table is where, you know, where one is weak, the other strong, I think has been really helpful for us. And so we've done that. So we've got loads of shared work we have together. We've also got separate work we do, which I think is really interesting because it sharpens both of us. And we've got 4 kids, so co-parenting has always been the thing we've done. So you have to have each other's backs when you're parenting 4 kids, right?
Definitely.
Favorite occupation as they're growing up, isn't it? Is to see whether you'll stick to the same message if you're not aware of what one parent has been asked. And it just popped up on our Facebook feed, or at least on my Facebook feed today, is memories of time we spent together some years ago now, when it was kind of the first time we were able to release ourselves and disentangle ourselves from the kids that were growing up. Being with them had always been such a high priority, and spent some time together. And we know, do you know what? We can do it together without them now as well. You know, we can do with them and we can do without them, and that was super reassuring. Not that we doubted it, but you know what I mean. A super beauty that as the future opens up in different ways, it's just all different seasons, and enjoying each season has been really important, actually, to lean into the season that you're in with the family, with the children and so on. And as they grow up and fly the nest a little bit and come back, as the case is for some of them at the minute, to really embrace the season and be grateful for what God's doing in all of it.
But also, I think as well, with the kids, having them part of the journey of what we do has always been really essential, that we've always traveled as a pack. And I think that's been really essential for them to see and be part of what we do, but actually to be able to own it and find space for themselves within it and find who they are within it. And that's always been really important to us to do that. Slower and harder, but important.
Yes. So let's, as you're looking at your shared adventure together, your journey, give us a little context of where you're at and what that journey in ministry looked like.
Sure. So we came to Ipswich, which was we grew up in South Wales, so the west part of Great Britain, the United Kingdom, and moved as far as we could to the other side without getting wet as missionaries from Wales to England almost 30 years ago.
Great rivalry between Wales and England. Wales feeling very downtrodden, by the English people. So we came as sacrificial missionaries to the English. So.
With probably a sense of superiority, having grown up in an era when Welsh rugby ruled the world, and it's no longer quite the case.
Sure.
So we had an inflated sense of our own importance. But came to Ipswich, which is just an hour outside London, north of London, towards the coast, and called to a church that was in the centre of town. And so we've journeyed there in ministry for, as I say, nearly 30 years, and perhaps that's some of the journey that we'll share. And as part of that, more recently, we've spun out into different kind of areas of coaching and leadership and ministry and so on. Working with Catalyse Change, for example, helping churches and kind of face the frontier of moving into missional discipleship and so on. And perhaps Ceri can say a little bit about some of the things that she's moved out into as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of co-adventure of leading a church, which I regularly do say to God, I don't think church leadership is a sensible job for a grown-up, but it's the place God's called us, and we are passionate believers in the church. Alongside that, I'm an executive coach, so I work both in the marketplace and in the Christian world as well, around coaching and culture change, leadership development. I head up Accessible Prophecy UK, which is kind of a global prophecy organisation that's come out of part of the 5Q family. And we both do a lot of stuff around 5Q as well. So really anything around coaching, leadership development, culture change, and setting up new businesses. So those are the kind of spaces we tend to hang out in.
Fun. Yeah, that sets up really well for a good conversation here. And, I'd love to hear your journey with your church of moving probably from a pastor-centric church into some missional discipleship. And what did that change look like for you, and how did that come about?
Sure. So we came to, as you say, what was a super pastor-centric environment, a large town-centered church that had never known what it had been to be anything but large and full of its own importance. That was the kind of spiritual atmosphere about it. It would just always had the privilege or the joy of being big. And what I mean by big is lots of people being present on a Sunday. And so in that sense, it was a preaching center, and the high point of the week was the sermon, and that kind of suited us in a way, because it was the kind of ministry that we'd been trained for and understood from our training and background. And but also right at the beginning, we could see the fundamental flaw that was taking place, which was a very elderly, static congregation. And we began in those early days to talk about the need to significantly change what was happening, because you didn't need to be a futurologist to realize that this church that thought it could never be anything but big would soon disappear unless something very fundamental happened. So then we began, changing a few things, and perhaps, Ceri, do you want us to just share a few of those things that we started to change and push into?
Yeah, and I think it was easy from the perspective of it was kind of, almost like a flat pack Baptist church then of what you would expect at most Baptist churches up and down the land, to go, well, there's some things we can alter, we can make sure the welcome is improved, right? So, if you're new to church, you need a really great welcome, and that wasn't necessarily there in the way you'd want it to be. we made sure that the music moved just into a slightly different century, probably, but was moving much more with kind of stuff that we would have been used to growing up with, rather than sort of just hymn sandwich. We were transitioning into pushing out in the music more, pushing into the worship. Teaching style, we kind of tried to mess around with the teaching, and I would run courses. We would run things like purpose-driven church and things about your ministry. And I think what that did, just those initial changes, is it led to a change in the demographic of our church. It started to attract a different age group, which is great. But actually, in full kingdom impact, we didn't see as much change. And that for us was a really deep, frustrating place to be, actually, that, you know, it looked outwardly great, but did it reach the least, the last and lost? I would have to say no in that moment. And so whilst we were growing in numbers, I think we would argue we were growing in frustration.
Yeah, I think we're always a little frustrated with that when we're trying to make, and we make a lot of internal changes to make things look better, to sound better. But really, the place where we could get people to actually embrace being uncomfortable and going towards the margins and the neglected is really, it's a hard change to make, especially when you're providing everything for somebody to be comfortable, right?
Yeah.
How did you get to a place where people would be okay with feeling uncomfortable and moving out a little bit?
Well, that's the irony, kind of the irony of it, isn't it? That at those moments that we'd made people most comfortable, we were feeling the least comfortable about the impact that it was producing. And I can remember asking people to think about the number of people that had come to faith over the last 12 months. You know, there's hundreds of us that gather on a Sunday. How many people have found faith over this last year? And of course, people struggle to name somebody, you know, anybody, please, there must be somebody, you know. So and you think, you know, so that huge frustration was building. And I guess there were two things for us at that point. Either we are doing the right thing and Jesus is Lord, so we're going to keep doing the right thing because it's the right thing, and one day it'll become good, or you have to trust God for the results anyway. Or actually, we're not quite as closely aligned to Jesus and his way as we thought we were. And the moment that we opened the window on the possibility that everything we've been schooled and trained in and learned and experienced as children growing up in churches and so on, we'd always been part of church life. Everything we've been schooled and learned and taught in wasn't perhaps the way of Jesus in the way that we had absorbed, opened up a whole new layer of possibilities and conversations, and suddenly you found yourself, just as God does with his Spirit, opening up all kinds of relationships with people, leaders, and so that we're asking exactly those same questions. Maybe this isn't exactly the model that Jesus gave us. And I mean, it's almost laughable now, isn't it, as we're, you know, a couple of decades on, but that's where I think so many people were, and maybe some of us still are, as we're wrestling with it, that this isn't quite the model. In fact, this is very far away from the model that Jesus gave us. And so we kind of pressed the pause button, and we called the day Launch the Lifeboats, which was all about.
Well, I think it started before that, didn't it? For us, we're going on sabbatical.
Yeah, go on. Talk, absolutely.
So we were going on sabbatical, and everyone was patting us on the back in that sense. You must be so proud of all you've achieved here. Whereas there's this internal burning of frustration. And we'd become the church to be, which was never a moniker we actually wanted, because we were growing by raping other churches. That's what was happening. You know, as often happens. So we went on a sabbatical and saying to God, okay, whatever we do, we can't do the same again. It just doesn't work. And I think that's really where we started just seeking people out. And that, sorry, carry on with where you were.
No, I think that's really important, and God was very gracious in terms of connections with people, and that's where we first kind of got caught up with some of the stuff Mike Breen was doing back then, and 3DM and all of that kind of missional discipling family, and it began to open up to us just a whole way of looking at the life of Jesus, where you kind of scarily go, why has no one talked about this since I've been alive, to me, to us, to any of us? Why has no one talked like this about, getting discipleship being put in the hands of ordinary people? Why has no one ever talked about the power of community rather than a gathering? Why has no one talked about what it means to put mission as the primary catalyst? And all of those things. I remember, listening to some of these kind of podcasts and talks from people that were wrestling with this, and you had these sort of little moments in your mind. I was at the top of a ladder outside our house trying to fix the bulb on a kind of safety, one of these lights that come on when people walk past. And
I just like to say he's not often on the top of a ladder, so that was that's why it stuck out for him.
Exactly, and DIY is not my greatest skill, and just I can think, when it talks about on the road to Emmaus, and their hearts were like on fire, going, "Gosh, this is amazing, and no one's talked like this before. We're onto something here that's going to change the world." So back to your original question about where did it start? I guess it started with us, with a real deep-seated conviction that it should be different and that it could be different. And if we had the courage to lead into that different space, we would see different results. And that just began to open up. It was not just, a new part of the game. It was like it opened up a new game. Suddenly it was a whole new way, a whole new way of being. And so we started to inspire people about missional vision and so on. And one of our guys started having this vision about what would happen outside the church. Why don't you share some of that story, Ceri?
Yeah, so we started with these kind of days where we just brought the church together, called Launch the Lifeboats, and started to kind of talk about some of the issues. And within that, saying, we're not blaming the church, we've led this way. Just so actually fessing up, this is kind of what looked right, but we're seeing something different. So one of our guys at church just felt God say to him one Sunday, just go and stand in the car park outside church. And he did, and he counted how many people walked past during the service. And he came back and said, how would you feel about me just serving coffee outside Sunday mornings? We're like, great, go for it. That sounds amazing. And that car park quickly became a place that was full of a lot of homeless people, a lot of people with addiction, a lot of need. But people were quickly connecting with Jesus and with faith. And it's an interesting thing. A lot of those wouldn't, and people would talk about, you start with this course. Well, actually, if people are illiterate, you kind of don't even start with the course, So actually, for some of them, it was just helping them to learn to read, to learn to hear the scripture, those things. But one story that always sticks out for us is there was a man that lived near the church, and the guy offered a coffee to him, and he said no, but the guy that was kind of leading this, people would describe him as looking like Jesus. He had kind of long hair, beard, always wore sandals. He's British, so of course with socks, which is never a great look, right? But as this man walked past, he just had this little thing in his head that said, Jesus just offered me a coffee. Now, he was a self-proclaimed atheist. So he turned back round and went and had a coffee. And we later saw him come to faith, be baptized, but we then saw him baptize people he brought to faith. And that was just an amazing moment of actually we can do church in a different way. It created a lot of mess, which also created a lot of people leaving, if I'm honest. We quickly discovered issues of that we didn't know. We would discover, like, we would need to put blue lighting in the toilets to stop people shooting up drugs during the service, which so actually some people started to react to, we like the idea of the least, the last and the lost, but we don't want to have to walk past them on our way into church. And the problem was for us, actually, we think that looks like Jesus. So we were just like, then honestly, be blessed to go to another church. So we repopulated another church. So it was mission in a different way. But I think within that, an amazing beauty grew, and we needed to start thinking about our church as much more of a public space, like a park. So in a park, you wouldn't leave your handbag on a seat or your kid unattended, because you don't know what would happen. You'd pay attention. And we needed to transition from church just being a safe place where it was the same people, to church being an open space that wasn't as safe as it had been. But man, it did look like Jesus.
Wow. And that was really a very simple start and a simple change. But it's pretty dynamic. If you look, let's just serve coffee out on the street during the service. So you're looking at something that's actually a simple change, but a lot of people, when they're in your position where everything looks good on the outside, when you have growth and things are big and there looks like there's a lot of life there, what are some ways for us to be able to take away the veil of which we are not actually seeing things the right way, where we think we're seeing things one way, but things are actually not working well? And it seemed like you guys were the only ones that were really struggling and wrestling with it. I'm sure there were a few others as well, but how do you get to a place where you go from one or two, like maybe this is not the right thing, into more people saying, oh, you are right, and it isn't the right thing, and we need to move forward?
I think that that's a really interesting question, and we've reflected on that over the years. And I think God was super gracious to us. So the two words that come to mind is both patience and then pace. So the first 10 years or so, when we were reinforcing the problem of attractional church, although it did have the benefit of making us sustainable, that wasn't there at the beginning. Because of that period of time, we'd loved people through the death of their parents, and we walked with people through tragedy, and we journeyed closely with people. So there was an element of trust that there would not have been if we'd simply rocked up and said, hey, let's go this way, people. So the power of the relationship and the relational capital that we were building in those early years turned out to be super important for the journey. And we didn't realize that that's what we were doing at the time. We were just loving people and and trying to build community with them in the way that we best knew. So that created for us a platform for the next culture shift that God was leading us into, that we couldn't see originally. And I think the second thing about pace is that we probably spent between 12 and 18 months sharing with the leadership and key stakeholders, probably for around 18 months before anyone would have seen anything above the surface. So there was a lot of plowing up the soil, so to speak, or sowing seeds, whatever metaphor you want to use, of just helping people begin to reflect on, hey, this is the journey that we are on. And it was, as Ceri was saying, really helpful that we had become part of the problem. We were complicit with it. We couldn't adopt the posture that said, you're all wrong, this is what you should be doing.
Right.
We're like, we think we're missing something here, and we've been the first among equals here as leaders of missing it with you. Let's discover something new together. And that posture, I think, created a trust and an openness that when we were then able to say, hey, we're going to let so-and-so, serve coffee in the car park, which would have seemed the most weirdest thing to people, 24 months previous, go, oh, well, okay, go on then. Let's have a crack. And so it created an environment that was very permission giving. So can I do? Yeah. Can I do? Can I have a go at? Yeah. Can I try? Yeah. And so that created all sorts of chaos and mess and disorientation for people, but it became a very permission giving posture. Whereas I think traditionally churches have had, that's going to cause me a lot of headache. No. Oh, well, we're not sure about that. Probably not. Some people won't like that. No. We don't see the value of that yet. No. And so I think we swept all that away and took the risk of being way too positive in our yeses.
Yeah.
Taking the risk at that point that God was up to something and something would come out of that. And that risk wasn't just actually in terms of like the car park environment. As we talked about building community, it became much closer to home, and we were encouraging people to build community around their homes and around their table, which is a very different dynamic to let's do something together at a certain time in the week in a third place, to let's invite people into home and into the family. And I think for us, the richest part of the journey was the people that we invited into our home and the way that we got to know people and journey with people. That had a huge impact on our children and their ability to disciple, their friends, and seeing their friends come to faith was a beautiful part of that. As we build community wherever we are, it's going to touch our lives and not just our kind of professional religious times.
I think that's been really interesting with the children, because we watch them baptize their best friends, and it kind of doesn't get better than that, if I'm honest. But actually, because you generate this culture of kind of inviting people and mission, and we're on it as a family, I'm like, all in for mission. And we'd go on holiday, then I'm like, I'm done with people, I want to be done. And one of our kids would go and find people wherever we were staying that seemed lonely or not in a good place, and go, I've invited them to dinner, because that's what we do. And I was like, oh man, he's right, we've chosen this culture, but I just wanted like 2 weeks break. So it was interesting that it became so natural for them to do that, and they've all continued that as a way of life, building culture wherever they go, of kind of creating stuff around your table and doing it missionally.
Yeah. And the table is really important as we're looking at what it looks like. Is you're not only now you're helping the church discover what does it actually look like to be missional and to be in a different space, but you're also then helping pre-believers discover what Jesus looks like around a table. And that's the space where you could actually hear people's stories. That's the space where you actually get to know people and what their needs are on a deeper level than you just saying, oh, I know what your need is, and you do a project to meet somebody's need, where you actually haven't sat around a table to hear what it is behind the problem. And so it actually goes deeper than surface. And so that table is really important. And have you continued with that table?
Yeah, I mean, obviously COVID was a bit of a problem with that, but it is what we do, where I think as we've been in a season where as our kids have kind of formed their communities as well, we're rethinking how we all do that, living in the same space. So that's been a different challenge. But the table's always the most important place for us in terms of wherever we go, we try to be intentionally missional. And so wherever we go, we're always inviting people in. That's kind of the way we roll, really. But I think what's been really interesting is the transition of, firstly, helping people to see that discipleship is not something you bring your friend to, and if a good sermon's preached, then hopefully they're going to come to faith. But actually, discipleship's in their hands. The DNA has changed within the culture at church, but which has meant that now what it looks like is it's about us supporting their vision. So it's a real change in direction, whereas before it was like, come and join us to do our thing, this event, this thing. It's now about, you've got this vision, how can we support you? So the whole kind of way has changed within the culture. And so for us, as our kids have formed their own communities, it's been right, how can we support you, and therefore how can we readjust to where we are and what we're doing and all of that. So I think it's embedded within our own family culture, but at church it's something, that sense of we're supporting you in the thing that God has placed on your heart is become embedded too.
That's really good. So for you guys, what does discipleship look like, and what is a disciple?
That's a great question, isn't it? What is it? So discipleship looks like inviting people into relationship with us so that they catch more than are taught the life of Jesus. So we talk a lot about the need for relationships to go deep rather than wide. So people will typically in our church culture would have had kind of lots of relationships. There was an important value placed on, I need to know everybody. So why don't we mix up the groups every other week so we all get to know everybody? Now, some people love that and some people hate that. But that sense of, if we're going to be united, then we all need to know each other, to going, actually, back to the Jesus model, he invited a few close. So for us, discipleship is, who are the people that God, so for Simon and Ceri, forget the kind of Simon and Ceri leaders, Simon and Ceri as people, it's like, who are the people that God is really laid on our patch? Who can we really invite into relationship for the medium to long term to see significant change in terms of journeying to Jesus, with Jesus, and on with Jesus? And that, I think, has both been, again, back to patience and pace, both been kind of a different way of thinking about the impact and the influence that you have. But it is the place where we've seen the greatest influence and get the greatest sense of, gosh, what a thrill to have been able to walk that journey with that person or those people. And as part of that life on life, it's about the things, the patterns and the rhythms that we embody being then, expressed and lived out. So, some very simple examples of it early on that really would thrill our hearts. So we would choose any and every moment to have a celebration. So, it's Tuesday. Way, let's have thrilled it's Tuesday, or whatever day, it's yay. And then particularly around, an easy win was birthdays. Every birthday we're going to absolutely pull the stops out and do something. And if it was in our kind of home and in our environment, we would always stop, didn't matter who was there, and just do the birthday, singing the happy birthday thing, and then, hey, this is a really precious moment, we're going to pray for this person, and a few of us would pray, and then just those beautiful moments when you go somewhere else and someone else does that very simple thing, and there's this beautiful moment with someone else in another place where they're getting prayed for on their birthday, and people are not yet of faith are listening in and going, oh, that was really moving, that touched me, and stuff. So that thinking about the way things are caught rather than the way things are taught, I think became a real transition for us. Yeah, because it's so easy, or it isn't anymore, but so easy to fall back on these are the things I need to tell you about. Yeah. And of course, that's the same with people that haven't found faith, isn't it? People are paralyzed by, these are all the things I have to tell my non-Christian friend in order for them to find faith. And we're kind of going, well, we're just going to love them. We're going to be friends with them. And wherever we go, be it the sailing club or wherever we spend dancing classes, wherever we spend our time, it's like, we know that we will spend as much time, if not more time and more energy, in the relating to those people than we do in the sailing or in the dancing. And that probably shows in the quality of our sailing and our dancing, actually.
Speak for yourself.
I was. But you kind of got that mindset, haven't you, of actually what's going to make the difference. The only thing that's going to make the difference is relationships that are close enough and meaningful enough for life on life to be caught.
And I think it's really about a way of life, isn't it? Mission can't be something that's an add-on. It's just got to be part of who you are. So every lens I go to into every spaces, there is a truth that my friends who don't know Jesus, I love my friends, I genuinely do, but actually I know that every situation they bring to me that's a problem, the thing that could really change that would be Jesus. So they're not a project, but if I love them and I love Jesus and I know that I've got the best thing for them, I want to show that and demonstrate that in my life, in how I live, in how I operate. And so I think it's mission has to be the life that you live, that is just the overflow of the relationship you have yourself with Jesus. And you want to, so we were recently, so our youngest son's a competitive sailor, so in the spirit, if you can't beat them, join them, we've learned to sail, and so we do a lot of rescue boats and all sorts of things like that. But we were at an event, and our 16-year-old was sat in the car with somebody else his age, and we were just talking to some people who came up outside, and he commented, your parents are just really good at talking to people. But actually that's, for them, it's not the thing you do as much, whereas actually we're going to just be Jesus shaped wherever we go, and be interested and lean into that sense of God's whisper and all of those things. So I think mission for us looks like lifestyle, and discipleship, therefore it all has to be simple and replicable, doesn't it, for it to actually be caught. They need to be near enough that they can see the difference Jesus makes.
Ceri, I would love for you to chime in a little bit of what it actually looks like to hear God's voice in the midst of a conversation with somebody where you're saying you're in that situation, you're at a competition, you're meeting somebody that you actually realize that God wants to speak to them in a specific way. How can we hear God's voice for that person and share it naturally in a conversation?
Yeah, so coming from the lens that obviously kind of in the sort of APEST profile, prophet is my strongest. So hearing God's voice is something I've kind of intentionally grown into, lent into, dealt with. And I think the first thing is you need to be leaning into God's voice for yourself in order to lean into God's voice to other people. Okay, so actually you need to be aware of if you can hear God's voice really clearly when it's quiet, what's the gentle challenge you can step into to start to lean into God's voice when it's noisy? Because you need that transition, that pivot point, don't you? You've been able to hear God's voice in both places. So for me, I think it's about always being aware that God speaks all of the time. And one of the biggest learnings for me was God speaks all the time, but am I always listening? Well, no. Okay, so how am I going to change that? I'm going to be aware, and as I'm talking to the person, be just saying, hey, Father, internally, I'm here. Anything you want to say, I'm here. Trusting that the Spirit of all truth lives within me. So I've learned to really understand, how does God speak to me? God speaks to me very much through instinct, gut feelings, but also through that kind of gentle whisper or a picture. So if it's somebody that genuinely doesn't know Jesus at all, I would say, hey, there's this thought that's just come to me. And if they don't know Jesus at all, and I'm leaning into, okay, just share the thought, don't say it's Jesus yet. Yeah. I'll share the thought, and if it's something that's really significant, it gets them to the point where they think they need me. But they don't need me, they need Jesus. If it's somebody I've been journeying with a bit longer, I would say something like, so there's this voice in my head, which I've come to know as God, and this is what I've heard. I'm just offering it. You don't have to have it. You don't have to receive it. But what do you think about that? And I've rarely had anyone ever really challenge that, because by then I've built the relational capital. Yeah. And even if they think I'm a bit mad, there's a reality that I'm not using words like, this is what God is saying, thus says the Lord. Yeah. I'm just saying the voice that I've come to know in my own life as God. Or if they ask me a question, it's that sense of going, I can only answer this through a lens of what I know God says to me. Yeah. So that's the only lens I've got. So for me, it was really intentionally choosing to be aware that God speaks all the time, and choosing to try to learn to do that in the quiet and in the noise. Yeah. And then intentionally saying to God, okay, every time I'm going into a conversation, I want to be just conscious of your voice. So I'm coming intentionally asking you to speak. Often for me, I see it quite visually as well. I can just see kind of a pathway that the conversation needs to go, but that's something I've grown into, I guess, if that makes sense. And it's very instinctive now, but it was intentionally going through a season of learning to hear God in stillness and in noise, and saying to God, I'm available, because I think God loves those words, right? I'm available. Yep. And learning, what is it that stops me hearing God's voice? Busyness. That would still be one of those for me. So recently, somebody was in our house doing some work, and as I was leaving, and I was rushing, when you kind of leave something to the last minute and then you're rushing, And they just said to me, "Hey, I saw a book on your desk about neurotheology. What's that?" And I, when you just like, oh, I could just go, "Oh yeah, I was just quite interested. Don't worry about it. I just heard God's whisper. Stay still. You're going to be late. Tell them."
Mm.
And I had that moment where I said to God internally, "Really? Do I really have to do this? I don't. I do you not respect my schedule? Clearly not." So so I just leant in and explained and said, "Oh, why are you asking?" And we ended up having this amazing conversation where the lens they would have seen life through would have been through much more kind of spiritual I'll cleanse my house with herbs, or I'll do this sort of thing. And I was like, oh, so how I would see that would be through God. But that amazing conversation would not have happened if I hadn't learned to tune in even through my rush or through the noise, because God's voice has to cut through all the noise internally. So what's the noise within your life that stops you leaning in and hearing God? And when you do talk to people, just remember that church words are really weird. And God's voice can be the most simplest message, can bring transformation. So you don't need to make it sound fancy. You just need to, okay, what's actually the thing that God wants to say? I don't know if that's helpful.
That's really helpful. And it's helpful to actually look at it. What does it look like to have conversations with pre-believers? And what does it look like to go in there and hear God's voice? That's really helpful for everybody. For both of you, you're both doing some coaching in different aspects and some, what does it look like for culture change, leadership? So for you and your community, since you are really coaching people where discovery is really important and pulling things out of people is really important instead of just being really directive, how does that impact and influence the discipleship culture within your community?
I think that's
everyone gets to play. I think is the word I'd use. Go on, Si.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a really good kicking off point, that we recognize that what we are called to do is not bring things to people, but call out what God's already placed within them. And that's why we love 5Q and APEST and so on, and helping people to see the Jesus shape that is there in them, and covering, kind of pushing all the rubble away, and the joy of when people see who they already are and therefore can step into becoming that is really thrilling. It's life-giving to us as we see it, but it's certainly life-giving to the people in their moment. I think one of the things around that whole culture is, and it's true, I think, in terms of all that Ceri was just saying about listening to God, is to encourage people to adopt that posture of curiosity about themselves, curiosity about what that makes you feel and think, curiosity about the way they respond to situations, because that for people is often the doorway into beginning to understand what Jesus has placed within them. So, that encouragement all the time for people to be curious about themselves, be curious about that conversation and what it made you feel and what you found out. And actually, for some people, that'll be the access way into hearing God speak, or to a fresh revelation. As you begin just to move through the rubble, and instead of just accepting things the way they are, that the questioning around curiosity and just moving some of that rubble, presuppositions, assumptions and stuff out the way, helps people really discover who they are. And so the APEST journey particularly has been so important for us in helping people frame what Jesus has placed in them. And that's a very precious thing, and has really helped us lean into a value piece about we absolutely need each other and everyone gets to play. And there isn't, a few people on the stage and other people paying to put them there or cheering them on while they do the work there. But we're all on the stage, as it were, and it needs all of us to bring that Jesus shape together. And I think that's been a lovely discovery that empowers everybody and helps everybody to find their place, and helps us to really value people when they're different to us. Because they might well be very different to me, but if they've got a different part of the Jesus shape, then I can't dismiss it, I can't rubbish it, I can't ignore it, I can't decide I don't want to be like them. I need to embrace what God has placed within them, and there's a huge depth of discovery in that journey.
I think in any church setting, the wisdom's in the room, isn't it? It's not the sage on the stage, and that's what we've been taught originally. You know, it was the kind of pastor teacher on the stage, but actually, so for us, every single person in our community is God shaped, and actually, we want to call out what's there, and we want to help them see what blocks it from being there. So in discipleship, we're always encouraging them, okay, what's God saying? What are you going to do about it? Those are the two questions we are always asking. And we're always asking, and who are you passing this on to? Actually, you can apprentice somebody. There's always the ability, even the most simplest thing, you can pass that on. So actually the permission for people to both have a go and fail, but actually to recognize that what's God already placed in your hands that you can use, what's he calling and how's he calling you to use it, I think is really essential in discipleship, both when you have faith and before faith, because many people, even on the journey to faith, just don't fully know who they are, and you can start to call out that Jesus shape that you see in them before they come. So one of my friends would say she's an atheist, but we're moving. She now asks me to pray for stuff, right? So I think that's great. That's a movement. But when she comes to faith, I can see she's going to be the most amazing evangelist, because whatever it is, she evangelized it. So I joke with her about that and just say, do you know, one day when you come to love Jesus like I do, you're going to tell everyone, because you already do that for everything else. But actually, you can call things out in people before they come to faith.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of coaching stance helps that, just observing and joining the dots up for people of leaning into the Spirit. What do you see? And how can you use that?
Yeah. I mean, we could go, all day in these conversations. We don't have time to go all day, but it would be fun. But, there's a few things that I'd love to get into. One would be, what do you think was your, one or two most important shifts and changes that you made to move people forward?
I think the first significant shift was the reality that everyone needs to play, and therefore the DNA of discipleship making, that potential was in everybody, and we needed to unlock it. And actually what we were doing wasn't unlocking it, it was just holding on to a system that actually disempowered people rather than empowered them. In that sense, that was the biggest, I think, cultural shift. And that's, has all kinds of expressions, like the wisdom's in the room and everyone gets to play and so on. But at its core, it was the belief that we all carry the DNA of Jesus within us, and we can all be part of the Jesus movement, and we've got all that we need. And that sense of releasing people, not to come and support our vision in some way, but just to say, how can we empower you in your vision, where God has already placed you, with the people already around you? We want to cheer you on there and enable you to be the church with the people and the places where God has put. So that, I think, was the biggest cultural shift that undergirded the whole thing. I think the second, probably most significant shift, we're already in, but it's a long way from being completed. And that's, what does it mean to be more deeply incarnated in the community? So we're at the kind of third season that God's calling us into, that we're in, but it's just the beginnings of, is about how can we really co-create with people around us in the community enough confidence in the gospel to deeply incarnate ourselves in partnership with other people, and so rather than perpetuate any sense of provider client or any sense of superiority, literally be right among, in the midst, in the neighborhood. And we've been just amazed recently at the way that local government and other kind of statutory bodies have flung wide their doors to those kind of conversations and partnerships in a way we've never known. So we're kind of super excited about that next level of incarnation, really. And I think that for us is the natural extension. But it is, again, another significant shift, because even if it's in your church or in your home or in your car park, it's still a bit more yours.
Yeah.
So we're looking at what does it mean to build a space and to create an environment that generally isn't ours in terms of ownership, and gets rid of all of that kind of barrier and stuff to the gospel. So we're just beginning to get excited and see things happen in that space, and God's opening relational doors and stuff at the moment.
And I think also within that there's a so I guess three things I would say. One is that of standing firm. So when you make culture change, it's about accepting you're going to make a mess. Okay, so you've got to stand firm, hold your nerve, and you've got to lead strong in those moments. The same, we understand this feels a mess. We understand, but actually, this is the greener pasture we're leading to. So actually, that was a shift of just completely going, because there's everything in you wants to fix the mess, don't you, Josh? I mean, make it look pretty, but we're like, no, we're going to hold our nerve on this. It is a mess, and it's going to get messier before it gets prettier, and that's okay. I think another one of those would be kind of the journey of owning. We're a church that's about celebration and community. It's both. It's not one or the other. So we're going to own both, and we're going to within the culture of that, the shift of that, tread the balance of that. It might mean that celebration doesn't look quite as good as it used to, but that's okay. And it might mean that you can't see all the community connections that you used to. That we see it all, so we need to communicate that well. But actually, we need to do both of those well. It is, I think, a significant shift. But another real shift is of moving people from oughts and got tos to this is what I get to do as part of God's kingdom. And I think that's a huge shift that's happening and happened. And the muscle memory is strong, right, of ought within church life. And we're always coming up against it and saying, that's not what we're trying to build. There's this adventure God's calling you into that you get to be part of. And we want to support you in that. There's no ought. We don't want you to have to do anything. We want you to do it because you get to do it. Yes. And I think that's been a really big shift for us. That actually gives the freedom and the permission to do things like co-create a space for your community that's not just ours, that we're giving away, because actually we all get to be part of this adventure.
That's so good. If you guys could go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Dress better. No.
Lighten up. You can speak for yourself now. I look cool when I was 21.
Awesome. So we do regret the matching outfit phase, definitely. Do you know, I think the advice would be actually at the end of the day, you need external people to keep, as a leader, to keep your heart from in a soft place and from being cynical and from getting truly bruised, and to help and challenge you, keep shaping your own discipleship with Jesus, and that you can't do this alone, and actually you just have to surrender. Just surrender it all, and it's going to be a lot easier. Keep surrendering, it's going to be a lot easier. I think that's what I would tell myself. What about you, Si?
I guess it's another reflection on something similar to that, and it sounds a cliche, doesn't it? But to pursue intimacy with God at all costs. That's where the life is. That's where the sustainability, the resilience is. That's where the healing comes from. That's where the faith for adventure comes from. And we will do almost anything, typically as human beings, than to pursue that intimacy with Jesus. And I guess I wish that training and formation and early leadership experiences had taught us to pursue that intimacy in a way we had to probably discover along the way, rather than it being the bedrock of what we were about. We were taught a shed load of things, but we weren't taught to be intimate with Jesus. And I guess that's what we long for our kids and for our younger generation, that above all else, they get that early, you know, and it's lovely when they say things that, gosh, I wish we knew that when we were their age, you know, because they've captured the essence of it. And that's I think what I'd say.
And the only thing I would say would be pause. The important pause in everything you do in leadership. Nothing has to be hurried. You've got to get, you know, I always say you need the space to get the grace to set the pace. And I think that's what I would have taught myself. I would have saved myself some heartache.
Yes, so. That's great. Anything you guys have been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
So we're reading a book which is, it's kind of, we're reading it slowly. It's called I'll probably get the name wrong. Can you remember
the Sound of Unspeakable Beauty?
And it's a book that was translated from German into English, and it's an older book and it's the journey of a luthier, so basically a violin maker, and he takes every stage of the making of a violin and kind of translates it into our relationship with God. And it's a book that creates space. So it's quite different stuff we might have read, but actually, as we're valuing it a lot together, because it does that thing called pause. It makes you. So we'll read a little bit, tiny bit of it, not even a whole chapter. Sometimes you think, I just need to think about that for a minute, because the way he's put that is quite picturesque and poetic and beautiful, and I just need to lean into what God might want to say. So I've been really enjoying that. How about you, Simon?
No, me too, loving that. I'm also on a second round of John Eldridge's Resilient book at the moment, and I think what he's, again, going back to what I was saying about pushing into intimacy, you know, there's some kind of helpful reflections and tools and just journey there to help people take the pause that Ceri's talking about, reflect on where we are out of COVID and so on. And I'm finding that super helpful for myself, super helpful in sharing with others as well. So yeah.
And what's the app that with that connected with that?
Yeah, there's the pause app, isn't there? That's connected app with that people have been, in fact, just taking some of the simple principles that he's talking about and just helping people take the pause, you know, get honest with God, you know, and learn what it is to surrender. I think those are they're just the fundamental lessons of this whole thing, and they can so easily be missed in all the stuff, you know.
Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? Yesterday or the day before, I was looking for a book, and I went down to the cellar here where I am below my office, and there's hundreds and hundreds of books that I dumped there so that I could have a nice clear space to work in. And I was wading through, and I was thinking, gosh, the amount of hours and energy that people have put in talking about all sorts of stuff. And it's not that it's bad or wrong. Some of it's brilliant and insightful and amazingly helpful. But at the end of the day, if you're not connecting into Jesus, you're never gonna make it. You know, it's in that sense, and you know, and I know that sounds so trite on one level, but it's so true in another reality.
Very, very true.
I've just started John Mark Comer's Live No Lies as well, which I'm enjoying so far.
Yeah,
I had to wait until everyone else in my family had read it, so I was kind of the bottom of the pile. And I'm the fastest reader, so you know I've had to wait a while.
Yeah, that's a good one. I love that one. Where can people connect with you guys and what you're doing? Anything that you would love to get out there?
So Accessible Prophecy UK, you can just find us on social media or Instagram or Facebook, and we're always kind of putting free events on as well as paid events. We're doing lots of stuff at the minute around with hearing God as a creative, what it means to be a creative and to use that and to connect to God's voice. That's really interesting, and we're about to start some work on what it means to be a prophet in the marketplace, so actually in kind of in business world, that sort of space. So that will be quite interesting.
Yeah, and we've got some work coming up as well about helping people in the workplace in terms of discipleship, both in terms of helping churches take seriously discipleship in the workplace, as well as helping disciples get a renewed sense of, oh my word, God's put me here for a purpose that's bigger than just the money or whatever, the purpose, and so on. So some work around that. We're also involved in the 5Q world. Ceri's just finished a PQ cohort. I'm about to start an accelerator for apostles. I guess the simplest way to get in touch with us is with Simon or with Ceri, Ceri, at Burlington.Church. I mean, that might not be the email that's appropriate for whatever those different channels are, but you can find us in those simple places, and we can connect. And
we're going to be running a leadership course this time next autumn, in the UK as well, which is going to be quite a holistic style leadership course in terms of giving your soul rest as well as helping you strengthen your leadership. So,
amen. Yeah. You need it. Well, Si and Ceri, thank you so much. It was a fantastic conversation. I wish we could actually extend it and talk some more, because it's fascinating. So thank you for walking us through some different culture shifts that you have gone through that I think will be really helpful for a lot of people. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Enjoyed
it's been great.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to the show today. If you're really enjoying the show, please don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app. You could do it right now. Just hit that little plus. And then I would love it if you would leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. So you could go right now to the show and leave a star rating and review, and let us know how you are enjoying the show. And find us on Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to connect, interact, I post a lot of quotes and different things that you could actually interact with the episodes, and let me know how you are enjoying the show. If you feel inclined to donate, there is a support the show link in the show notes, and it would send you directly to a page where you could donate so that new episodes can be produced for your enjoyment. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an incredible week.